Okay, how many people in this room think diversity is good? Raise your hand. How many of you think you could explain what it's actually doing that's good? Few less hands. So the purpose of this talk is to let you be able to make that explanation. What is it doing that's good? So I'm going to ask you to hold your questions till the end because we're short on time and I want to make sure that I get to the end of this because it's kind of a complex topic. It's not as straightforward as the earlier talk. And it takes a little more thought. So you've all seen these soil food webs, right? I borrowed this one from the NRCS. And we've got our organisms that live in the soil. And of course, I had one person tell me, birds don't live in the soil. First time I gave this talk. And then I'm going to turn it all on its side and I'm going to block out the above ground processes. And because I can be a smart ass too, I found a burrowing owl. So a lot of organisms, besides just the microbes and insects and the nematodes, live off the soil. You've all seen robins, I'm sure. They got a lot of birds out here digging and pulling worms out of the soil. But rats, foxes, shrews, snakes, frogs, snails, salamanders, skunks, toads, ants, bees, beetles, termites, and I could go on. There's stuff you haven't even thought of that directly make a living off the soil. And they're all part of that overall diversity. And we find all these things when we start removing things from soil. Look at that diversity. Well, those guys weren't on that chart. How come they weren't in the picture of the soil food web? What about all these microbes? We didn't see them in the soil food web chart. Where do they belong in the scheme of things? How come they're not included? Oh my God, what is that? The most common phrase uttered by new soil scientists looking for the first time at soil under a microscope. I'm telling you, there are some monsters in there. Oops, I should have taken that guy out. I thought this was a tardigrade. I found out it wasn't. But you know, these are real organisms that live in our soil. Especially those forest soils have a lot of these guys. They're the most indestructible organism on Earth. This is an example of a real food web. A very small one. A very small food web that these guys looked at parasites on a small island that had a limited population of mammals. So this is a very small food web. And there's a huge difference in the true complexity of food webs compared to the models that we look at. So the models mislead us, and we don't often recognize just how much complexity there is in these systems. That's why for years and years, decades, up until recently, we didn't have any idea what was going on in these systems. We had to wait until we discovered genetics and how to look at genes to even find out how much diversity was in our soil. The technology had to come first. It was too complicated for us to grasp, and we just never gave it any thought. Soil is what plants grow in. It's just minerals from plant material. If you go back 20 years and open a book on soil, they only talk about the minerals. There's never any talk about the living things. And Ray Archuleta, whom I love, once in a talk put up a picture of Mars and said, "This is what you have if there's no life. It's geology." And it was such an awesome point. A single teaspoon of soil, that's not very much, can hold up to a billion bacteria. You can't even imagine these numbers and seeing them and how much is in there. Hundreds of meters of fungal hyphae, thousands of protozoa, scores of nematodes, and we aren't even addressing the big things like earthworms and other things that live in the soil, and larger insects and spiders. I mean, it's incredible how much life there is in soil. The majority of the planet's life is under our feet, literally. Now, to really understand what biodiversity is doing for you, you need to understand a few concepts. One is a niche. In ecology, a niche defines how an organism lives. It's the area that it lives in, the function it plays in the ecosystem, and the interrelationship of that species with all the biotic, living, and abiotic, unliving factors associating with it and interacting with it. So that would be the mineral, abiotic, the mineral part of the soil organic matter, the things that aren't alive, as well as the living things. That's a niche. It's basically to sum it up in simple terms, everything you need to live. So as a human being, what defines your niche? You have a niche. What is it? What do you need to live?
Food and water.
Food, water,
Air.
air.
Gin.
Gin? You need gin?
Gin.
Oh, gin. So you, Jim? Something we didn't know? Gin, okay. Not sure how essential that is. I would have said beer. And to proliferate your species as part of this, you have to have a mate. So those are all the things: food, shelter, a mate, to sum it up in short. That defines your niche. So although you have a niche, can you also be a niche? How many say yes? Are you a niche? Are there things that live in and on you? Sure there are. In 2012, a scientist came out with this. This was from the cover of Scientific American, and said, we're 80% or 90% microbes and only 10% us. If we threw you in a blender and started sampling DNA, we would only find your DNA 1 out of 10 times. These microbes provide vitamins, help us digest our food, protect us from other organisms that might do us harm, pathogens. They produce hormones and affect our moods. They're now doing, believe it or not, fecal transplants to alter the biological community inside people's guts to cure diseases, because these guys have that big an influence on our physiology. And it was a joke at first, but it worked so consistently that the scientific and medical communities stopped laughing. But then another scientist came along and said, aha, this guy was wrong. We're really 20% us. So I doubled my meanness after reading that. I'm 20% me, not just 10%. But it's incredible.
So what is your bacteria-fungi ratio then?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't tested it. Not sure I want to know. So the more diversity in your ecosystem, the more niches you create. So diversity begets diversity. So we added all these people. If one person left, did diversity go down by one? Diversity went down by all those microbes living in and on them too, right? So niches are nested. That's sort of the take-home message. So the more diversity in your ecosystem, the more niches you create, and the more niches you create, the more organisms you can have occupying the same ecosystem. Now I'm going to come back to this, and I want you to take a look at this hierarchy. There's sort of a hierarchy of size. Little things are eaten by bigger things, or eaten by even bigger things, are eaten by gargantuan things, not including pack animals like wolves, but in general, this is sort of the rule, that if you're small and something bigger comes along, your job is to run away. You know? So let's say I read an article that said, oh, these predatory nematodes are really great for your soil. If you get more of those, they're going to eat the other guys, they're going to kill your pests, they're going to really wipe out all your problems, and it's going to improve your soil, and you'll have better harvests, because they're going to eat those nematodes that are eating your plants too, because they're cannibals. So ferocious predatory nematodes, I'm going to get myself a bucket of those. I'm going to order them online. I'm going to get Gross Bob's bucket of nematodes, extra ferocious, the best kind out there, and I'm going to spread them all over my field. What's going to happen? And I have actually seen ads like this. What's going to happen? Well, the nematode population is going to have a sudden boom. Suddenly we've got more of them, more predatory nematodes. And they're going to eat up all of these guys, which is going to cause a boom in these guys. The whole system is going to adjust to that new population, right? Here's the guy you were trying to kill. You just made more of them. And these guys are going to have a food boom. But then they're going to eat up everything because there's not enough of this to support them, or there would already be more of them. That's how we know they would be there, because biological systems, Mother Nature leaves nothing to waste. Everything that can be there will try to be there. So that means these guys are going to, what's left of these guys, they're going to have a population boom, and then they're going to die. and the system is going to readjust itself and go right back to the way it was. So, did your money do anything for you? The question is, why can't we change our soils? Why can't I have more of these guys and have them do those things that I wanted them to do? Well, to get more of these guys, you have to have more of these guys if you want to keep them in your soil and not have them for 2 days and then they all starve, right? And to get more of these guys, you need more of these guys. And in order to get more of these guys, you have to actually leave the soil and go to your plant community, because it's the plants that feed the whole system. The plants feed the whole system. All that carbon that they're pulling out of the atmosphere and shunting into the soil is food for everything, and that's the foundation of the soil food web. So to increase your soil biology, you have to increase your plant diversity. There is no other way to do it. Adding anything will not make a significant or meaningful long-term change in your soil. There is good news. There is good news. Beneficial organisms outnumber plant pathogens, and this is specifically plant pathogens, 1,000 to 1. Most of the things that live in soil are beneficial. There's also bad news. Our management practices act in favor of the pathogens and kill the beneficials. That's the bad news. So we say, well, what are we doing that's helping this? Pesticides play a big role, a huge role. I love this cartoon. It's so accurate. This is what it is to the microbes and the tiny things. And to us, it's just, I'm just going to kill a few things. You're not just killing a few things. You're killing everything. You're killing tons of things. This is a diversity pie. This pie represents the diversity in your soil. I just made it up. You know, real soil diversity would be so many slices I couldn't make my point. But here's our diversity pie. And this is before we use any kind of pesticide. And then after we use a pesticide, well, sorry, I'll back up. Before the pesticide, let's say we spotted something that we were concerned with, or someone said, you should be concerned with this and you should spray before you see it to make sure you don't see it. Prophylactic spraying. So we go in, we're worried. What if this eats our crop? We might not be able to pay that bank loan. I was astounded when I learned farmers had to take a loan to get a crop. That's like, I was astounded. That's like, I'm paying you to give me a job. After pesticide, we have wiped out this guy, so no more worries, right? He's gone. But we wiped out a lot of other things. The community adjusts itself. There are no empty niches that stay empty for long. Resources have become available because we killed a lot of competitors. And now other populations grow because they have access to those resources. And this guy, who was just a tiny sliver of the pie, may have gone unnoticed, but could become a problem as a large slice of the pie, because now the guys that used to hunt and kill this guy and keep his population under control are gone. And we never even knew he could be a problem, or was there, or might have become a problem, but now he's a new problem. So what do? We get a new pesticide that has a different action, and we target that guy. And we get trapped in this cycle of pesticide use that doesn't really solve the problem. It might solve it temporarily. We might get to the one thing we thought we saw, but we're not improving our soil. I have a friend who I went fishing with, and we brought back all the fish to the house, and he said to me, I'm going to cook the fish. And I said, I don't have time for that. He says, no, I'm going to cook the fish and leave it at your house, and you're going to have fish, and I'll take my fish home. I said, you're going to cook my fish? He said, yeah, I've heard rumors about your cooking, and I couldn't bear to see these fish go through that. But he made a comment to me. You know, I watched him do the cooking and go, they weren't rumors, they were true. So I'm watching him cook, and he's talking about his auntie who taught him how to cook, and he said one of the things she told me was never add anything to your dish that doesn't enhance it. Don't pour water, add bouillon. Add something that enhances the dish. And I thought we should carry that to our soil. Never add anything to your soil that's not enhancing your soil. And most of the things we add to our soil are not providing enhancement. They're not improving our long-term soil quality and fertility. They're usually addressing a symptom. And then every time we spray a new pesticide, we roll the dice on who's going to take over and become dominant. We don't have control over that because the pesticide doesn't kill just that guy. It kills all sorts of other things. So the take-home message here is that pesticides reduce diversity and kill beneficial organisms. And there's just no way around that. And I'm going to target insecticides here. For every one target pest, insecticides kill over 700 beneficial insects. That's the ratio. That's why we're seeing the scale tip in the other direction. And that doesn't even address nematicides, fungicides, herbicides. We're constantly putting poison into the environment, the same environment that we use for our food source. And common sense will tell you, sooner or later, that will bite us in the ass. Pesticides reduce diversity. And when you lose diversity, you lose the actions of the soil. You lose all the benefits that diversity brings. In prairie soil, we did this, me and Michael Lehman at the USDA. We went and tested prairie soils, and we extracted spores, all the fungal spores we could find. Remember, 80% of plant pathogens are fungi. So we found that the beneficial fungi, and we put them all in one column and called them AMF. This is our beneficial group. Anything that's not AMF might be the good, the bad, the ugly, some neutral stuff, commensals. We just packaged them into two groups, AMF and non-AMF. And we found that AMF spores outnumbered non-AMF spores 7-to-1 in the prairie. And we tested agricultural soils from all across the country and found that this group, the non-mycorrhizal, outnumbered the mycorrhiza by 5-to-2. This is what farming has led to. But we have to farm. We need to farm. No farms, no food, right? Got it on the bumper sticker. So what do? Do we have to kill our AMF to farm? Well, the big culprit here is killing off all of our diversity. That's what's tilting things in favor of the pests. That's what brings on these problems. And we want, when we change our soil, to make it a permanent change, not just a little blip on the radar. We want to see things change and see our soil consistently produce better and be healthier and produce good food with fewer inputs and less toxins. Now, pests are a symptom. And often, we have to address those symptoms. Do you ignore a fever? Can a fever kill you? Can a fever kill you? Fever can kill you. I had one almost kill me. It came on so fast and so hard, I could barely get help. My brain was boiling. But the fever was not the disease. Something had actually burrowed into my leg, and when I rolled up my pant leg, my whole leg was red. Okay? That was the disease. Something had gotten into an ant bite and was traveling through my body, so they loaded me up with antibiotics. So you have to treat the symptom. You can't ignore symptoms. So I'm not going to say never ever use a pesticide or an herbicide or a fungicide. Sometimes you can't avoid them. They're so prevalent. But think about their usage. Do you need them? And use them as sparingly as possible. You got to keep an eye on your cropping system. Be aware of what's happening in it. Walk the field every now and then. A lot of farmers, and I'm not saying you guys, but a lot of people don't do that anymore. It used to be part of farming, was checking on your plants and seeing how they're. I think a lot of times we just plant them and you know, wait for them to grow up and then harvest them. I don't know. How many people walk their fields and look for pests? Scouts. Oh, I love you guys. That's most of you. But you've got to be observant. Pest problems are an indication that the ecosystem is out of balance. So what happened to our diversity pie? Something became predominant. That's what made it a pest. Eradication is never an economically feasible solution. You cannot eradicate pests. They are always going to come back. What you have to do is make an unfavorable environment for them. It doesn't matter that they're there. They're there, and they're such a small part of that diversity pie that their presence doesn't impact your yield. You might not even know they're there. But they're still there, even if you haven't seen them. So you want to create competition for them so they don't have enough resources to become a problem. Pests are a symptom of low biodiversity. That's what they are. They got the opportunity because of the conditions that we created with our farming, usually because we're monocropping. And now that there's tons of research behind that, we know that we can tilt the scales back by adding diversity. And we know where to add it. Are we going to go gross Bob? Buy a bucket of nematodes? Or do we start at the top of the food chain and let the results filter through the whole system? You got to go to the top. You've got to go to your plants. Empty niches create opportunities for one population to grow disproportionately and become a problem. It can be a problem even if it's not hurting your crop by just consuming all the guys that kept somebody else under control. It can be an indirect problem. So treat the symptoms if you need to, but don't ignore the real cause of the problem. So competitive exclusion is one of the mechanisms by which organisms keep other organisms in check, and beneficials, and particular mycorrhizae, keep things out of your plant roots that don't belong there. So if I'm going to rob a house, which one of these houses do you think I'm going to rob? The unoccupied house, right? Those are the uncolonized plant roots, okay? You almost never see pests inside plant roots that are colonized by mycorrhizal fungi because they're armed and they're waiting, and it's going to be a battle. And if the pests get in there, they're not likely to stay very long. And it's because of that diversity that allows that to happen. The unoccupied, uncolonized roots are empty niches waiting to be occupied. And if the mycorrhizae aren't there to occupy it, something else will. It will not go unoccupied. So off he goes. So back to the question, why can't we change our soils? Well, because we have to recognize that to make a permanent change in our soils, we have to leave the soils and go to the plant communities and increase the system from the top down. Carbon feeds soils. Diversity drives ecosystems. And without the carbon, you can't have the diversity. So the plants pull the CO2 out of the air where it's not wanted and put it in the soil where it's used to build soil structure and support the microbes that keep your soil and your plants healthy. It's really simple when you think about it that way. And it really is that simple. Diversity creates competition for resources. And I'm going to give you an example of how quickly you can start getting your diversity back. And you need to understand the actions of synergism for this. So let's say I've got these microbes, microbes A, microbes B, and microbes C, and this purple represents their home on the roots. And if I have a plant that's all A's, I get 3 units of benefit. And if I'm going to harvest this crop, units of benefit may be biomass, if I want to eat it or use it for forage, okay? So I get 3 units of A. I'll get 2 units if it's all B, and I'll get 5 units if it's all C. So which one do I want, A, B, or C? All of them. You guys are too smart for this. Right. The no-brainer is C. Make them all do 5. But when they interact, their interactions result in more benefits. And then you get 10 units of benefits, or more than 10 units of benefits by combining them. So synergism is when the sum of the components within a system is exceeded by their combined total. And there are a lot of synergistic interactions that go on in soil. And I'm going to give you an example with 2 plants. The 2 plants come together. They have their own unique communities. There might be overlaps in the species, but the communities are unique. And when their roots interact, a 3rd community forms. So separate, we only had 2 communities. But together, we have 3 communities below ground. So 2 plants just multiplied our microbes by 3. So what if I add a 3rd plant? What am I going to get? When you bring in your 3rd plant, you create new interactions. And here we've shown that 3 plants have created a significant increase in the number of communities that are formed. But then those new communities also interact with one another and create new communities. And I just stopped right there drawing because all of those communities are also going to interact. And I'm not really sure where it would max out, but at some point I'm sure it will. But you can see that even adding a little bit more diversity to your ecosystem can create a great deal more diversity in your soil. Additional interactions multiply the synergism, and small increases in plant diversity can yield large increases in microbial diversity. Increasing plant diversity increases the complexity of the soil food web, and never forget, it's that soil food web that is recycling and cycling and making available nutrients to your plants. Otherwise, they'd just be bound up. It's microbes that feed plants. The sun and the water and all that start the system, but plants evolved to get their nutrients not in a sterile environment, but in an environment rich in life. Because the interactions of these microbes and their little lifespans, living and dying and being hunted by other microbes, are constantly releasing nutrients. And every one of those little cells, for those little bacteria and those little fungal cells, are full of cytoplasm, which is a liquid, which is moisture. So microbes also hold moisture in the soil. They're part of the moisture that's in your soil. So that's an important aspect of them as well. And the take-home message here is that biodiversity is what drives ecosystems. Without it, your ecosystem isn't going to function. And the agricultural ecosystem is very important to the world, not just because it feeds us, but also because it's the largest ecosystem on the planet. And if it breaks down and doesn't function, that's most of the world's soil no longer functioning. It's not just a little bit. We've replaced most of the natural ecosystems with the agricultural ecosystems. So they're very important everywhere. They're what keep everything going. So agriculture is the simplification of complex food webs because we monocrop and then everything decreases and reality begins to look like our models. And things can't go on like that forever. We know that we're losing soil. Can that go on indefinitely? Sooner or later, if we run out of soil, we won't be able to grow food or anything else. So we have to rebuild our soils. It's also the simplification of the complex food webs, and the consequence of reduced diversity is reduced productivity and reduced system resiliency. Without that healthy soil and all of those systems working and keeping the nutrients cycling, then your crops can't respond to bad conditions. Look at all the things that the mycorrhiza do for them, but they're not doing it alone. It's all those other microbes are supporting the mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza have symbiotes that live inside their spores, called blows, bacterial-like organisms. It's a symbiote with a symbiote. I mean, everything is so interrelated that we can't afford to break down the system, because once the resiliency is gone, how do you bring it back? It's a huge challenge. But it's not that hard. At the point that we're at now on a global scale, it's not that hard to bring things back. Because it all begins with the plants. And how hard is it to just add a few more species in there, get some cover crops going? So how does reducing complexity reduce resiliency in our cropping systems? Well, remember, it's the community of AMF that convey multiple benefits to our cropping systems. Remember that list of 16 things? Which one do you want to just start throwing away as you lose things? Right? That's literally what we do, is we lose things. As the species decline, the resiliency declines, and then we start having pest problems, and it's harder to grow a crop, and our yields aren't good. We compensate with chemicals and nutrients and everything else because we're compensating for the system not functioning to its full potential. Microbes cycle nutrients, and through their combined actions form water-stable aggregates in soil. We need that. We need those water-stable aggregates. You need microbial diversity to have a resilient cropping system. And literally, above-ground diversity begets below-ground diversity. So, if our goal is to regenerate soil quality, create a resilient agricultural ecosystem, we need to increase our plant diversity, increase microbial diversity, improve drought tolerance, increase soil stability, improve our water holding capacity so the soil holds and stores water, so it's there when we have a drought, and plants are more likely to survive that drought. And we need to protect our soil from erosion. Those are the goals. We got to do all those things. So what's the solution? What's the solution? I'm not going to say it's a silver bullet, but that right there, that does a little bit of everything. Cover crops. They're an opportunity to introduce plant diversity, which will increase your microbial diversity, which will improve plant protection, drought tolerance, and nutrient cycling all at once. All you did was add some cover crops. You added plant diversity. They increase soil organic matter. This improves the water holding capacity of your soil. They physically cover the soil and protect it from the impact of rain and wind, which prevents erosion. The end result is a stronger, more resilient ecosystem. This is the keystone right here in keeping the ecosystem functioning. We removed the diversity from the system to get crops, and monocropping had its role in its place, but now we know that it has hurt us over the long shot. But we can get all that sustainability and the resiliency back into the system by just adding a little biodiversity, and cover crops are the opportunity to do that. You got a window, throw in some stuff. I think the future of agriculture is companion cropping. That's what people used to do to control pests. So there's been a lot of research done by farmers, not even scientists, farmers, the Griffith brothers. If you get a chance to hear them talk, listen to them. They are trying every combination of plants that they can, looking for things that support each other. Low-growing clover between the rows of your corn supplies nitrogen to the corn, improves yields. There are a lot of combinations, and I'm just waiting for somebody to pull all that data together and put it in one source. And it's going to vary depending on your soil type, and what works for one person may not work for another person. So farmers need to share what they learn as they experiment. I think every farm should have an area, a section, whatever size makes sense, and say, I'm going to try things here. I'm going to try one thing new every year, and if this benefits my farm, then I can move it to the rest of the farm. I never say experiment with the whole farm, right? Because it might not work. You master it. If you're in transition from a conventional and you want to go to no-till, it's a skill. You're learning a new skill. So you got to talk to people who have mastered it and try it on a section. Master it on that section, and then move it to the rest of your field. You'll know what to expect then. But you guys are the best scientists we have. You're the ones out there with your feet on the ground and your eyes on the plants, more than people like me who spend most of their time in a laboratory. Okay? So we rely on you to guide us as scientists. And you guys rely on each other to learn. People are always looking over, oh, I don't want my farm to look ugly. People will talk to me, say I'm a dirty farmer. I've got too many weeds. What did they plant out there? Why are they growing that? You got to be bold. Say, well, if it works. Or you can say nothing and just laugh your way to the bank. So managing for microbes reduces your input costs, reduces nutrient loss, increases your nutrient use efficiency, brings early pea to plants, increased yields, provides synergistic benefits, and it can give you a crop even in a bad year. Soil health, good soil health is your best crop insurance. The value of soil organic matter. It absorbs water, acting like a sponge and holding it in the soil profile. This makes it available later when things are dry. It provides a multitude of niches for soil microbes. It adds to the soil carbon pool, and it's loaded with nutrients because those plants are bringing the stuff up from the depths. Those deep-rooting cover crops get some deep-rooting things in there. They're bringing those minerals up and depositing at the top. And the goal here is to keep them cycling so that they're always going through your system, not letting them wash off the top, because that top layer is your most nutrient-dense layer. You don't want to let them escape. You got to keep those nutrients on your farm. And someone down at Ohio State University put a dollar value just on the nutrients that you find in your soil organic matter, your residue, the stuff that you're building up. So if you assume 1,000 tons of soil in the top 6 inches of soil across 1 acre, your nutrients have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 10 to 1, which is supposed to be the ideal ratio. You're storing a lot of carbon. You're capturing nutrients because nutrients bind to carbon, to soil carbon and soil organic matter. And the 1% increase in soil organic matter gains 25,000 gallons of water holding capacity per acre. A friend of mine does research on this, and he complained that I was quoting too low a number. And I said, well, have you published your paper? He said, no. After it gets past peer review, I'll talk about your results. Because we need that, right? We need that peer review. You guys are peer review. Jim is a peer reviewer. He, what are you saying about the water and and the tiling, right? We got to have these dialogues, and we got to bring up both sides. We can't ignore one side and say, well, just do it my way. I'm the expert. It doesn't work that way. We need you guys directing this. You got to have a voice in the research. You have to make your needs known to the research community. What do you need to know? What will improve your soil? You can't just say, I want higher yields, because you'll get the short-term solution, right? You've got to encompass the big picture.
Okay.
On the cover crops and diversity, we did an experiment at the ARS where we looked at how cover crops select for the best microbial community for the cash crop. So we did all these plots with different cover crops, monocrops, and then we planted corn over it and looked at which cover crop promoted the best microbial community. How did those cover crops change the yields in all those plots? And then we had some mixes, and it wasn't very much, of mixes of 2 and 3. We only went 1, a bunch of different stuff, and then we went 2 and we went 3. 3 mixes. You know what we found? Diversity was more important than species. The 3 cover crops, even though one of them was non-mycorrhizal, we still saw higher colonization rates. So what is that non-mycorrhizal plant doing, since it diminished the number of mycorrhizal plants in the soil to promote mycorrhizae?
Making them compete.
Exactly. Oh, you are brilliant. Competition stimulates things to respond. You're never going to get into that, are you?